let me have the honor of getting us started. Again, for those who don't know my context and my innovation, in addition to what I said about my transition, I also worked in a very different space before innovation, which called nuclear weapon security. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But ladies and gentlemen, please give me a warm virtual welcoming to our speakers and the room together. I'm so glad you are here. So with that being said, let me go ahead and ask each one of you. Okay, first, Eliza, tell me, why do you care to bring innovation and food? And is this something that you thought you wanted to build your career when you first started?
No, I had a wild ride getting here. I actually started my career at a very funny uh, theater degree way, and naturally moved myself to New York, which also meant I became a bartender as a starving actress and just tumbled into kitchen world and have been saying yes to that ever since. So I think it was something that I'd always been passionate about, something that meant a lot to me growing up. Food was always kind of a love language. And so I chased it a little bit more and more as I got older, and then started culinary school and jumped full throttle into it, and spent the next decade, been 10 years in restaurant world, working my way up the chain of command until I could have the title of executive chef. And now I teach. So I got to marry a little bit of the two things, performance and food together. And it's really been amazing to transform different people's lives by getting them back in tune and in touch with their hands. I worked specifically with kids for the past couple of years, and now I work with corporate teams. Um, we get to cook, and that's something that has become a dying art, and something I'm really passionate about bringing back into the education system, and really, really adamant about getting people excited about. Being able to feed yourself and do it well is, I think, the greatest show of love. For me, it's like kind of this like weird maternal instinct. I just have to like feed and help others learn how to do that too. Um, so finding my way through that, developing my own path wasn't easy, but I get to do something I love in the realm that I love, which is pretty awesome.
I love that. And again, folks who are calling in, tuning in, hey, if you thought you were in a career and you were like, wait, is there something else? I think we're already getting a hint. It's okay. You might not know where it's going to transition next. So, as you're joining in, if something resonates with you, feel free to share it in the chat. I want to hear your thoughts. But to build on that, I'm going to check in with Jessica because I know her journey is a little different. You shared a very intriguing story of how even when you were young, you knew that law was something that you cared. Please tell us more because that's not what most people think about law.
Absolutely, Monica. Again, good evening, everyone. It's again so great to connect with you. As Monica stated, when I was young, I watched the nightly news with Tom Brokaw with my father, and also watched The Cosby Show, and Claire Huxtable was a lawyer, but Janet Reno was the attorney general when I was watching the nightly news with my dad. And I always wanted to know what she did because she was always walking around with the president, who was Bill Clinton at the time. And I was just inquisitive. And we had a World Book Encyclopedia set at our house. And so my dad, he told me to go look up what the word attorney meant. And we did. And I was intrigued by what an attorney did from that very early age. And so I knew then that I wanted to be an attorney. And over the course of years, I had experiences that allowed me to really to understand what an attorney actually did. And as we go further in the conversation, we'll go deeper into that journey.
You forgot to. I'm curious to learn about the conversation you had with your brother too, if I'm not
Oh, yes.
mistaken.
Well,
Please.
Monica, you have a great memory. So I think I actually started exercising some of these attorney skills very early on because we had cable very late in life. So we did not have cable at an early age. So when we got cable television, it was very much a novelty in our house. And my brother and I, we would split the time equally, well, equally in quotes, by playing basketball games to actually win television time. And whenever I would kind of stretch that time out, and I would probably take my brother's time, and he realized that this really wasn't equal. So he would and so I decided that we would sign contracts and promise each other the amount of time that we would get the television. And so I started drafting these contracts, and that ensured that we would have the amount of time that I promised and that he promised me. So it really started with, I guess, indirectly with cable television. That's how I knew that a contract enforced a promise. And now I write about promises and contracts in my children's book series, and we'll go into that, I'm sure, later in the conversation.
Makes a huge story, and thank you for bringing
Thank you
that to
for
the
reminding me about that.
Yeah, because it's so unique. I mean, I have a brother. I don't think we have a lot of arguments and conversations, but we don't ever think about writing contracts. So it's so inspiring that, that was something that you both thought of. And Meg, to build on that, your journey also is very unique in that, this whole field, when you first started, you weren't even sure if this is something that you care to be. And now seeing where you are, I'm so excited. Please share a little bit more on your journey.
Yes, thank you, Monica. Again, really glad to be here and be on a panel with these amazing female innovators, and to get to meet all of you. So my job in digital marketing was kind of it was a pit stop when I started. I was, entering in at an entry level kind of administrative duties, intern level, kind of thinking about going back to school to teach or to be a writer or to do something completely different than what I ended up doing. And I'm lucky enough to work at a women-owned business that actually really encouraged young voices at that time. And I remember just being invited into conversations, invited into different, well, what do you think of this? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I like that. But I was also given the opportunity to make change. And I think because I was given the opportunity to really carve my own path, I really fell in love with what the company became and what we stand for today. And being able to kind of put my stamp on that and have that impact has really been probably the biggest blessing in the journey that I've had so far.
Love it. Love it. I mean, who knew? Any interns, any sidekick jobs that you all take, remember, you never know where that's going to take you in a whole career. As in Eliza said, that stop that it was going to be in New York, see where it took. Or that contract signing that you do as a childhood, you never know where it takes. And, for me, my stepping point, especially in the business now, was the day I cried in the bus. And I realized one day that, maybe I want to stop crying in the bus because it's a little embarrassing. Commute people, you all know, same people in the same bus, like they see you all the time, and they're like, okay, maybe if I walk, I'm going to see different people, so it's going to be a little less embarrassing. It really started with that curiosity, and that's where I quickly realized a whole other journey. And as you are probably noticing, and I'm seeing a lot of validation from the chat as well, thank you, Linda, Tara, Katavina, and Tara, for highlighting how you all feel. And again, be curious, each of you, I know all of your journey is different as well. Please continue to share what your journey path is. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue to dig a little bit deeper because, let's be honest, we're not all just here because of the nice, shiny, pretty resumes that we have. We're going to talk about the other half, which is the challenges and the stuff that we don't get to talk enough about. So I'm going to circle around, just because I can maybe start with you. Let's talk about the truth, right? So in addition to you doing law, you also do children's book, which I hope you get to speak a little bit more about. And I know one of the things you spoke about was how it felt for you to even decide what to share on LinkedIn. Could you share a little bit more why that was a challenge and what was an important lesson you learned at that moment?
Sure. So my journey into children's book writing from lawyering was a journey that I did not necessarily expect, but I was called by my passion to create more diversity in children's literature. So I have my little baby girl here, Juris P. Prudence. She's an 11-year-old lawyer, and she does all types of cool things. And I've loved reading as a kid. I love the American Girl series, and I never let go of that love of children's books. I was practicing law, and I graduated from law school almost 11 years ago. I was in my first law firm job, and I was writing briefs and realized I wanted to write more creatively. I wanted to do something that was more creative. And I started just drafting jurisprudence and drafting about jurisprudence. I would find myself in bookstores and, number one, not seeing any characters that look like me in real life law practice, not seeing any characters that look like me being a Black woman. And so I wanted to create an image of an 11-year-old lawyer that looked like me and did amazing things as an 11-year-old in the century that we live in. And I have some books for show and tell, just because I always talk about my American Girl collection. And I actually went and found some of my old books from the American Girl collection. But my Addie books, like, I loved Addie so much. I have my American Girl doll sitting here. And this was the book that I grew up with, but she was a slave. So I wanted to create this new character. So just fast forward several years into the practice of law, same lack of diversity, just not really seeing anyone that looked like me, and decided I'm going to leave the traditional practice. I'm leaving corporate practice, large law, fancy law, getting off of that trajectory that many people who went to, I went to a top 10 law school. Many people, went to corporate law and went to the government and then went in-house. So I jumped off of that very traditional track and started my own law firm, and also started a content company that produces the books in the jurisprudence collection. So in that other career, that more passionate creative career, I was afraid to talk about it because I wasn't on that traditional path that I think everyone expected me to be on, going from a large fancy law firm to now doing something that was totally off the beaten path. So I was afraid to talk about it on LinkedIn, where all of your professional colleagues are. I didn't announce starting my own practice until 6 months into the practice, because of that fear of what people would think, or thinking I wasn't good enough, and all of the things and all the thoughts that are junk that come into your mind when you're doing something that's untraditional.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, in the chat, folks, I'm sure this is not a foreign news. We go through this, and I think honestly, as female innovators, there's an additional layer that we honestly feel and go through. Jessica, if I can just piggyback on that, tell me a little bit more. What helped you then get out of that voice? Does that voice ever leave you?
It has dissipated very strongly, thankfully, over the course of years. Number one, follow a lot of innovators. You, Monica, are awesome. I think being in a community of people who do different things makes you realize you're not alone. You're not the unicorn that someone once described entrepreneurs as. That I met a guy and he said, entrepreneurs are unicorns. And it made me think, well, maybe we are a little different, but it's okay to be different. And I think I've just embraced that, being unique. Like, this is my path. This is my journey. I actually really love this journey. And so the more that I became comfortable with loving my journey and realizing that it was just for me, that gave me the courage to say, I'm going to stand strong in my journey and stand strong in the fact that I love being an entrepreneur. I love being a lawyer. I think, I'm a good lawyer. And so I very much think I'm a good lawyer in my own practice. And I just have the confidence, I think, through the years, but it took a while to cast out those voices of doubt. And occasionally, I think they do seep in, but they, as I stated, they are far less strong than they were when I first made that jump.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for the accurate depiction, which is it never necessarily disappears, but we transition our role with that voice. To carry on with that, it continues to delve in. And I think, to build on that, Meg, I want to hear from your perspective, because one, not only have you had to think about how we transition in this voice throughout the roles and how you became an executive. I know some examples where you shared about how it felt when you were in those meeting rooms where, you shared an example where you're like, wait, my opinion, my voice, we'll love to hear some examples on that. But also would love if you can share a lens. I know many of us also who's joining might be parents or know other colleagues who are parents, and especially during this time, that voice of being a parent and a female executive is an extra layer that we need to feel challenged, and I think we'll be remiss to ignore that. So tell me both of those lenses if you can.
Absolutely. So I spent a lot of my career early on when I had made the decision that this was something that I had legs in. I decided to investigate, to learn more, to really kind of invest myself in really learning this business and seeing, where I could go with it. There's a lot of creativity in marketing, and marketing really attracts a creative group. And I think that's probably what drew me towards it. Specifically in my business, we're actually mirroring data with digital marketing and with the creative voice. And I remember sitting in a lot of these meetings with some of our corporate clients in the background, because at the time I was either a junior level or, there as more of a support type of person to really kind of take notes, take it back to the team to kind of, innovate and come up with solutions. But I wasn't there at the table specifically for my voice to be heard. And I'm sitting around the table at the time, our senior executive levels were men. They were a lot, middle-aged white men. And not that that's a bad thing, but I remember sitting in a meeting with a very large client, then hearing a topic come up that was kind of, going back and forth. And I felt it come up out of my throat, like my opinion, and I couldn't grab it back. Has anybody had that happen where you're like, oh no, I just said that? And you have this kind of sensation of, okay, it's quiet. And then everybody starts going, and then, you start to kind of change the flow of the conversation. And it happened as an accident. And I remember feeling red, like I could feel the blood like rush to my cheeks, being like so flushed and embarrassed, like, how could you have said that? Like, this was not your place. And feeling what I think Jessica actually informed me of was like imposter syndrome, right? Like I didn't have a name for it at the time. And I remember just kind of feeling like, okay, maybe that wasn't so scary. Like maybe that was okay, because again, what I had to say made an impact in the conversation. And that was extremely exciting. So, internally, what ended up happening was I was invited to be part of more conversations. And I was invited to share my voice and share my opinion. And from that, actually started doing my own research and ended up facilitating a lot of internal training at the company, which was great. Which is really kind of where I felt like my shift happened to get me where I am now. And now where I am now is a mom of 2 kids under the age of 3, as a female executive in the middle of a pandemic, trying to, do what I have to do. My husband's also a high level executive as well. And we're really just trying to do what we can. My daughter just turned 3, actually has special needs. My son is just turned 9 months old, like 2 days ago. He's just starting to kind of walk and talk. And when I think about, what their future is going to be like and what I want to teach them, it comes from a very different place of where I was 4 years ago, which was advancing my career, advancing the company, advancing, my network, advancing my reach. And now I look at it very much more like, how do I set them up, not only for success, because success is if that's what they want, but how do I set them up for happiness? Because every time I go to work, I'm happy, right? I have a smile on my face. So how do I inspire them to do what's going to bring them joy every day, the same way that I get joy, even when it's hard? I don't know how many moms are out there, but I literally just joined this group called Hey Mama, just for specifically for moms or females in business that are having these conversations about, okay, my kid's 3, I can't sit her on, a Zoom for school and type out all of these emails and make my call list that day. So it's a lot of, it's another hand to juggle that we didn't think about, as I think I didn't think about 4 years ago. And I was like, yeah, let's have kids. So, yeah, it's another superpower, right?
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for also making it real, right? Especially during this time, it has been absolutely an additional challenge. And honestly, there has been some concerning articles, I think, in celebration of Women History Month, that the pandemic has shifted perhaps maybe the needle too concerning in certain countries. I think in the States, we are able to have some conversations, but in Asia and maybe other countries and cultures, they're saying that it's making it harder for moms to come back and work and continue to thrive. And I know that's not for news, especially Eliza, for you, whether being a mom or not, just hearing this stat of like 2%. I'm curious actually in general, as you share about your insight, why is it hard that you feel to see more females in chef? Because the irony is that I feel like cooking is an example where there's a whole bunch of irony. It's like, you know, in the house, we're kind of like have the myself like, well, why is it only a female cooking in the house? But sometimes in the workplace, the chefs are men. So tell me a little bit more. I don't know if you ever had that duality. This is a complete other question and thought that came up as I was thinking. But also, you know, what gives you then the courage to find your voice? Because I know you shared about the challenges you had to go through to find your voice and, you know, kind of figuring out, is this the right way? This is the only type of role models. You shared about your female other chef and how they've done. Tell me your voice journey.
Well, it's ongoing and it will always be ongoing. And slowly but surely it gets stronger, I think. But we all suffer, I think, especially as females, from that imposter syndrome at times. And whether that's because we're surrounded by, you know, what we think are the roles we have to fulfill or not. I've named mine. My imposter's name is Agnes, and I have chats with her when she comes up. I'm not kidding. That's how I can really like deal with that voice, because it's very real for a lot of us. And I think if you can put a name to it, acknowledge that that is actually not the reality, that's simply Agnes making her presence known, then it's a lot more simple to grapple with that. I used to be fearful of putting new dishes on a menu. I would wonder if all the guests were, as an executive chef, I would panic every day when we had to do the specials, and I would let the waiters try, and I would like stand there and pretend to have my cool and be like knees wobbling, wondering if this is going to be okay. So it takes time, I think, to find your voice. And I think something I struggled with was, because of seeing so many males in the role that I was trying to achieve, I kept trying to fit my square peg in the round hole, and I kept trying to like, you know, no, I'm going to pick up that 60-pound bag of potatoes. I can do it. Like, I would pretend I was sort of putting all these masks on. Maybe that was from all the acting I had been doing before that, but I just sort of like felt that I needed to fulfill whatever that specific role was, rather than grounding myself and having faith in myself and my own capabilities and my own power and carving my own path. So I think I kind of assimilate, I kind of like took on these other characteristics of people I thought were what I was supposed to be achieving. I think, especially when we're women working in a men's world, we put on these sort of airs, or we put on what we think we're supposed to be doing, rather than just following our own instinct, following our own gut. And that's so difficult to do. It is such a tricky, I don't know, that's another superhero power, Meg, to be able to like listen to that, your own voice, and trust your own voice, and have faith in your own capabilities. But when we do, I'm telling you what, like magical things happen. And you know, I used to have the same, I heard in Jessica's story, like I used to have the same fear of people not respecting me, people not taking me seriously, because I took a path less traveled. I call myself a chef entertainer now. Like, I made that up. So I think there's something beautiful that can happen when you trust your own abilities. And of course, it takes time to develop the skill set that you need to actually see those through to fruition. It took me 10 years to develop a sense of culinary understanding. And it took me a lot of mentors, and it took me a lot of difficulties in the workforce, and feeling like I needed to prove myself to others. But at the end of the day, I just had to prove myself to me. That's what it took. That was kind of like the the game changer. When I would like look around, you know, I did a Christmas service and we served over 600 guests, and I could say, okay, I've done it. We're okay now. You know, and whatever that hurdle is, it's different for all of us. But I think that trust is really where it starts. Trusting ourselves and the incredible, powerful inner power that we have. I mean, ladies, we be superheroes, okay? Like it's there for each of us. I mean this sincerely. In the same way I believe everybody has the ability to cook, I believe we all have the ability to carve our own path and really achieve a destiny that we want. We can make those choices to get there. But the first step starts with, trusting ourselves. That's hard. That's hard to do. We can say that.
It is hard. It is hard. And actually, to piggyback on that, Eliza, tell me a little bit more. What helps you trust yourself when you hear those doubts? Other than that, you have the character who has that voice. What helps you? Because sometimes it still feels hard, and especially during this time, I think even for those who used to do this very well, I think that's where the extra stress is. When it's like, wait, I didn't have this problem before. Like, there's something about COVID is just making things worse. Tell me what helps you when you feel those moments that this is how I go back and trust my voice.
There's lots of ways you can do it. I think it's very difficult when you're in that mindset and kind of like naysaying and putting yourself down. First is naming it. Agnes, go away. Take a chill pill. Second, I think, is also having the ability to turn around and see where you've come from. If you can say, okay, today, a year ago, where was I? And 2 years ago, where was I? 10 years ago, where was I? And just kind of see how you've blossomed and grown. And give yourself a friggin' pat on the back. Like, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I can say this from my standpoint as a woman in the culinary industry. I carry a lot of pressure to do things perfectly and to do them, to blow people out of the water, because I've always felt the need to like over exceed, because I felt like I wasn't good enough, or I felt like I had to prove it even more than the men I was working side by side with. So I think being able to kind of take that moment and look back at what have you achieved, and be able to say that to yourself. You can say it to the world if it means like you post a Instagram post about, hey, this awesome thing happened. I did it for myself. I am a Food Network show chop champion, and I was having a rough day. I was like, you know what? 1 year ago today, this awesome thing happened, and I did that. And then accept the applause like that. Like that might be hard for us to do too, accepting that we are pretty awesome, and accepting those sort of like achievements and staying grounded in those. That it's hard, but I think that might be a good start when you have that imposter sneak in.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for your chats and comments. How are we doing? Is this helpful? Is it resonating with all of you? The good drive, good. To build on that, I hope that we're being reminded that all of these, again, I know it's one thing to, listen and feel like, yeah, I feel that way too. But again, it would be remiss, InnovatorsBox does, like, I want to make sure we think about action steps, right? As you're thinking about this, I want you to hold yourself accountable. What's at least a question that's coming to mind for you? What's perhaps a quote that maybe hold on to? Maybe a reminder that maybe I want to reach out to this person. Maybe actually you want to reach out to some of these folks here, or maybe you resonated with a comment. I encourage to kind of cement that excitement back to action, and maybe a reminder, as Eliza said, you know what? Yeah, actually, I did that accomplishment even just last week. I should talk about this in my next social media post. That's an action, ladies and gentlemen. Like, building on that is so key. And to build on that, there was a wonderful question that already came up. And again, this is my cue. If you have questions, please share it in the chat. We want to hear from you. But Tara Levine, if you don't mind saying hello, I love the question you shared in the chat. Would you be able to share some context and say hello?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hello. How are you?
Hello. Yes. Great. Hi, I'm good. Thank you for asking. What was the question that you're referring to? The one that I directed to Chef?
I wasn't sure if it was to someone specific, but you asked, do you find yourself asking for permission from men? Yes, please give me a little bit more.
and maybe that can be posed to the entire panel. I was just curious, do you ladies find yourself in kind of male prominent roles or industries, if you will? Do you find yourself asking for permission from other men that are, senior leaders or above you in some way, shape, or form, or even others for that matter? So maybe other, executives or people that you work with. Do you find yourself diving into those questions of asking for acceptance and seeking acceptance from an external matter, rather than kind of saying, you know what, hey, I can do this. I'm culpable, I'm available, I can definitely accept this challenge without needing permission? I'd like to hear from you guys and see what your thoughts are on that.
Perfect.
Thank you, Monica.
Tara, for such a wonderful, important question. Meg, would love to hear your thoughts first on this.
Sure, that's a great question. I think for me, I used to ask permission for everything I did. Before I drafted, a proposal, I needed permission. Before I drafted a new concept, I needed permission. Before I drafted a training that I was doing for my senior executives, I would ask permission, because I didn't want to offend or step outside of my role, or, kind of know my place within the hierarchy. And I think it's not that I think the better way to put it is I started collaborating. I started just inviting somebody into the conversation with me. And I think that change of approach definitely changed my attitude and my views on asking for permission, because it almost removed what I envisioned at the time as my own ceiling and my own box that I fit in. So when I invited someone to collaborate with me on a project, it became, ours. And I would invite a lot of the senior executives, the owner of the company, the president of the company. I would love your input on this. This is what I'm doing. And it became that, like, I think this is going to be great for, and then it became for my team, because as I got promoted, I started having others that, had to answer to me for certain things. And I wanted to make sure I was giving them the opportunity to create and innovate within the company as well. So it became more of a collaboration, more of a concept for me. And that's how my permission stopped.
I love that. I love that. Such an important way of reframing. Thank you for the example. Jessica, what about for you?
I love this question. What I realized that early on in my career, I worked with a number of males, and I watched them, and I watched how they would ask for vacation or state the amount of authority that they would exercise over a project, and what projects they were taking, and what types of business development events that they would be working on. And so they did not ask for permission. That's one thing I realized. They really asserted their power very confidently. And I decided I was going to emulate that behavior. And so I would bring a proposal and say, this is what I plan to do, and put the onus on my bosses to say, no, that's not the way that this is going to happen. And then usually they would offer a reason why if it wasn't something that they liked, but typically they like that type of assertiveness. And that's what I realized. You have to ask the question, and you have to be willing to state, I really believe in what I'm saying. I really believe in the request or the proposal or course of action that I'm planning on taking. Now, as my own boss, I don't have to ask for permission. I realize I have a lot of opposing counsel. A lot of my opposing counsel, they are men. And I definitely always have to make sure that I assert my voice strongly when there is I think the imposter syndrome or questioning maybe from opposing counsel, or even age. When I was very early in my career, there was a male opposing counsel, and he really tried to make me feel very young and very incompetent. And when I was practicing law 30 years ago, this is how we did it, and we never did it this way. And he was totally wrong. And so I had to just be very confident in those moments to say no, even though, I was just a couple years into practicing at that point, but I had to just know and be confident in my voice. So I tried to stop asking for permission at a very early stage in my career, and it's very rare that I'll ask.
And that feels so powerful. Again, the ask is in the phrase. And I think that's very important, right? We are still, you can still be kind and thoughtful and ask a question, but not for permission. I learned it the hard way too. And I think having worked both in government, nonprofit, international organizations where you go through a lot of communication threads, so somebody just needs to decide. If not, then we're going to just keep going around and round circles. And especially now in business, as somebody as well who is constantly in front of a room where I am very aware. I mean, I'm aware because I don't usually talk about my age, but like I'm aware sometimes like I might be one of their youngest executive coach that they might not have thought about. And to keeping in mind that, how do I make sure that I'm not letting that carry away from myself, but take that away as permission. And so in regards to email threads, even I've noticed how over time, I write my drafts the comfortable way I do, and then I take a look to see like, am I phrasing these ways to ask for permission versus clarifying for direction? And that gives a huge difference. Yes, Jessica.
Just to piggyback on that, there's one thing that I have tried to actively do, and that's take out the word just from my emails, because I think that
likes
me. And so I always intuitively just write it. It's just a natural habit of mine, but I will make sure that I intentionally go back and delete I just wanted to, because your request it's an important request and you don't need to make yourself smaller. There's no reason for that. And so you just triggered something when you said the phrasing, when you talked about the phrasing. And I think it's important to take away these, I'm sorry to bother you, or thinking that you're not worthy of the time that people are using to listen to your voice.
Because your time is important. And this carries to another great question. Linda, I loved the question that you raised in the chat for me. Would you mind being able to share on audio? Because I think that's something that we could all think a little bit more on.
Absolutely. And thank you for this conversation. I've been really enjoying it. My question is basically along the lines of something I know I struggle with is, you want to present yourself as like a strong female leader, but sometimes it's perceived as being bossy or, being harsh and kind of getting over that mentality. So, because I do work with a lot of young females and also young males. And I also, one of the nicest compliments I received from one of the females I worked with was that they were really happy to see a strong leader or a strong voice in the conversation. But it's difficult because I find myself kind of holding back or thinking constantly, how is this going to be perceived? I hope that no one's going to think it's bossy, I'm hurting someone's feelings. Just kind of want to hear about your experience with that and how you kind of overcome that.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you raised, because it looks like Tara also raised the very same question. So this is something on our mind. Eliza, I want to hear your thoughts on this as a start.
Yeah, I have a story I like to share along this vein, just because I think it kind of frames it for me. My very first restaurant I worked at out of culinary school, big deal for me, was working in the Flatiron in New York City, and I had an incredibly talented female chef who was my chef. I was a line cook, just trying to do my best. And I constantly felt like she would put on airs because of either, people who had been in her life who had been these kind of like machismo, very intentional, like harsh. She was like cruel to the servers, would fire people on the spot, would throw a fit if anybody, asked her to divide a dish up. And I could tell that wasn't really her. And I started to absorb those tendencies, and I started to like behave a little bit more rudely or brusquely to like busboy. I remember very clearly a moment where I got really angry at one of the servers had asked me to do something I knew chef wouldn't make me do. Like I knew she would be mad about it. And I threw a pan across the kitchen and it landed in the bus stop. And I saw the busboy, like, I thought he was going to jump out of his skin. He was so startled that like I would get angry in that way. And I had the revelation that I wasn't being true to myself. So I think like, I was like, I've taken on this sort of like harsh nature that isn't true to me. So I don't think it's a question, like, I don't think it's a question of being bossy or being, I think just being true to yourself is exactly what you have to do. If that means that you are direct, perfect. Yeah, I think I just really think it's imperative to be true to yourself, and whatever that means, whatever that looks like. So if you are somebody who's direct and you want to, you feel like you have to soften that email with one line of encouragement first, that's fine. If you are someone who is a little bit more, empathetic, beautiful, like people will value that too. But I really think it starts with being true to yourself, whatever that looks like.
Thank you for sharing that in such an important question. I know others, Jessica and Meg would have some thoughts too, but I want to make sure I also see Ellen's hand raised. So I want to take the other question and build on this. Ellen, glad to see you raising, and please share me your question.
Yeah, so a lot of people talk about this removing just from the statement, which I totally agree. But have you ever felt this? Because I personally felt in some cases where I get into very male-dominated group setting or meetings, then it works well by removing just or those phrases and to be more assertive. But when it comes to female-dominated meeting or the group setting, it I don't know, this is not just my feeling, but I get some feedback that you're too aggressive or a little bit maybe too much. Can you be a little more thoughtful? So I don't know how to read the audience. If you know the audience in advance, have you ever felt that in the past?
Such a great follow-up nuanced question. Thank you for asking that, Jessica. I'm going to piggyback on you on this first because of what we spoke about on the nuance. Do you, in fact, change the way you speak when you speak in different groups?
I still think, so I do. I think that it's important to make sure that you know your audience. And so when you are, I think I have a lot of energy. Sometimes I am talking to someone who might be, and I'm ambiverted, but I have my very extroverted moments. And so in my periods of extroversion, if I'm meeting an introvert, I understand that I need to kind of tone it down a little bit, because I realize it can be draining for introverts to have to absorb the energy of extroverts. And being a little, I learned this ambivert term in Entrepreneur Magazine. And that's why I'm like, when I'm in my periods of I just want to read and journal and create, I understand how draining it is to be around an introvert or around an extrovert. And so I think that that's one of the ways that I will change my communication style. In being confident, I think it's important to always just express your confidence, because I think especially in the business world, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And I think that trust factor is really built by confidence. And I think you can show humility and still be confident. And so expressing your thoughts very, very confidently, being sure in your thoughts, I think that you can still find ways to be humble, to be a nice person, to be a kind person, to be a good person. And I think when people, and I think that that's a whole other conversation about how do you build connection in relationships, because I think when you're building those connections and those relationships, people respect your confidence and don't think that you're being the B word.
Thank you for sharing that. Meg, what about you? What's coming up as you're thinking about both of these questions that we've been talking about?
I mean, I think it's so interesting because I've experienced a few different sides of this. Coming up in a female-owned company, from seeing and hearing about, from men or individuals that have left that have said, I'll never work for a female executive again, or also kind of coming at it from the lens as a mother too, women, and I used the term superhero before, but it's very true. And sometimes when you're an executive level or you're running your own business, you are managing a lot of things. And sometimes that direct voice is necessary to get the job done. And depending on who that voice or who's hearing that voice, you don't always know what's going on in their personal life and their background. But sometimes it can kind of hit them a different way. And maybe they're not used to working for a female executive. Maybe they're not used to working for a young female executive. maybe they're not used to a collaborative environment. It's all about, as a leader, the environment and the tone that you set. I've worked for somebody who, an executive that refused to make their own copies, go get me my coffee. I've worked with executives, or from when I was in high school working at a job at McDonald's, my manager at the time would scrub the bathrooms themselves. Like, there's that type of leader that, anybody will follow you into anything. And I think regardless of gender or identity, if you have that type of, I don't know even what to call it, that force around you that people are going to follow, that you're going to inspire, that's what I would strive for over rethinking, did this come off as too direct?
The intentionality is huge. And believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our conversation. I know we only have a minute or two, but I'm going to stretch a few more minutes to kind of start wrapping up. First, please continue to share in the chat what's coming up for you. I would love to kind of holding you all accountable. If you can share at least one thing that you're going to walk away as a takeaway, please share it in the chat, any action items. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask and circle back any key advice that you will share as we think about, because we're going to continue on these series and how we think differently. And I hope, again, for folks who are joining, that this is a reminder that how do we intentionally make the space to be around people who inspire us, motivate us, but perhaps also call us out to say that, hey, I think, Monica, I think today you have your imposter symptom voice talking a little bit more. Let's make sure that, that's not dominating. So actually want to circle Eliza first. What's at least one, maybe perhaps question that you want the folks to walk away with and keeping in mind? And we'll do this rapid circle.
Break the rules a little. And in doing so, hopefully you can break the mold. So I hope, I know how difficult it is to find your voice and to find what feels right. And every day I struggle to do it better and more. So I hope that everybody can walk away today with just trusting that inner voice, and if not, at least seeking it out.
Jessica.
So as we talk about innovation is a very scary place to be, to innovate something and to build something new. You're often alone. And whether that's becoming a C-suite executive or building a company, it feels very odd, and it can feel very uncomfortable, and imposter syndrome can sneak up on you. So one thing that I would implore you to do, this is something that I try to do when I am facing that fear of making the connection. Maybe I know there's someone I need to connect with, but I'm afraid because I feel like I might be wasting their time, or I'm not smart enough, or for what all of the voices that come into your head. So I write down what that fear is, what that thought is. What if it's a project that I don't feel like I'm capable of taking on? I write down what my thoughts are, and then I go and I think about. I give myself all the reasons. I advocate for myself internally, and then make that decision to go forward. And so make sure that you call out that imposter. You really hold your imposter, and I'm blanking on your imposter's name, Eliza, but name your imposter and write down what she's saying, and then counter back with real reasons on why she's not saying the right things.
Meg.
Yes, I mean, I'm definitely naming my imposter. I'm thinking of all of the different mean girls in high school and going through the list. But I think for me, what I would say is we all have a voice, whether that's a wallflower voice, or an in-your-face voice, or a direct voice, or a happy voice, or whatever that voice is. I would encourage everybody here to inspire that in someone else, right? Women as a community, I've been in so many different groups, and you always walk away feeling more empowered after, events like this. So again, thank you, Monica, for putting this on. But I would encourage everybody to really kind of think about, what, I had a really great day today. You're feeling, on top of the world. Go out and find somebody and pull that voice out in them.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm so glad you are here, and look forward to hearing your journey to innovation and continuing on growth. So have a wonderful evening or morning or day wherever you are, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Special thanks again for Jessica, Eliza, and Meg. Thank you all.
Thanks.